Before the video begins, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's joined me over on Patreon. Your support means more than I could ever put into words. February 23rd, 1944. Rollen Stewart is born in Spokane, Washington. Through his early life, both of his parents were alcoholics, and when he was 7 years old, his father would pass away. Growing up, he was reported to be a shy and quiet child, one who says he was unable to speak his mind and held a lot back. His mother was severely depressed and suffered from epilepsy, making it difficult for him to invite any friends over to his house. He recalls feeling isolated and alone for much of his childhood. Rollen never had many friends, and as he got a little older, he would get a job at a local supermarket, where he stole beer and tried to entice the popular people to hang out with him. Through this period of time, he would develop a keen interest in drag racing, and said that this was the first time in his life where he felt something had given him purpose. He wanted a cool, fast car so that he could make a statement for himself, and to show others his value. In 1968, when he was in his early 20s, his mother would pass away in a house fire, and in the very same year, his sister is strangled and killed by her boyfriend. In the face of these tragedies, Rollen would attain a family inheritance, and this would keep him going for a number of years as he tried to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. He marries his first love, and together they have a daughter. Life is going well, but he needed to find work to support his family. Rollen says that he had a lot of experience working in retail, and a lot of knowledge about cars, so he decided to open up his own specialized car parts store for drag racing. Although he was known to be a very hard worker, putting 110% into his business, he also found himself drinking quite heavily, and eventually cracks begin to emerge in his marriage. His wife ends up getting fed up with Rollen, and she leaves him, and this was said to have devastated the man, as he didn't see it coming. He sells his business and begins to travel, and after 2 years he settles on a ranch in Washington state where he would begin to grow marijuana. He also quits drinking, but takes up smoking weed instead. And looking for a way to leave his mark on the world, Rollen attempts to grow the world's longest mustache for the Guinness World Records. It's during this time that he begins to watch a lot of television. Rollen becomes obsessed with the idea of being a Hollywood star, and he states that by watching talk shows, he would study the careers of big-time celebrities, learning the ins and outs of their trade. In 1976, when Rollen is 32 years old, he has a light bulb moment. Watching a sports game, he realizes that he could go to nationally televised events, and he could create a personality that appears in the audiences, a reoccurring character that people will recognize and remember. And in doing this, he would be able to skip all of the casting lines and auditions. He could become a star overnight, thus giving him complete control over his life. He could move into doing commercials, and from there, work his way into Hollywood from that angle. Rollen says, quote, "I had watched sports on television, seen all of the angles, and I saw that a person could stand in the background of all of these shots and become instantly known. I had a dream, but I needed a magnet. To stand there as a person would be fine, but I could do it twice as good if I had a color scheme or something." End quote. Rollen decides to wear a rainbow wig and a loincloth, and that would be his calling card. In 1977, he makes his first appearance, and the character he created was dubbed the Rainbow Man. As he's walking around the bottom aisle during the NBA game, a cameraman grabs him and says, "Stop, I'm going to make you world famous." The red light on the camera switches on, indicating that it was live, and for 7 seconds, Rollen dances, curls his moustache, and gives positive hand signs. Rollen says that he's not an outgoing person at all, very quiet and introverted, but as soon as the cameras were on him, he let loose and became the most extroverted person on the planet. He had 7 seconds of airtime, and Rollen claimed that he was hooked. All he could think of was when he could next dance for the red eye on that camera. Over time, Rollen would attend more and more games. He would bring a battery-powered television with him, where he could tune into the live events that he was at, and he could see exactly where the cameras were. That way, he knew where to position himself at all times to ensure that he was being filmed. Rollen would sell his ranch and use the money from it to attend more and more games. It seemed that Rollen's dream was working out. He becomes quite well known. Newspaper articles are written about him. When he goes to games, he is recognized, and people allow him to move around their seats so that he could get into the shots. He is also offered a role to play in a Budweiser commercial, and still using the money from the sale of his ranch, he begins living the high life, flying to every event he could possibly attend, and splurging on things that he considered a Hollywood celebrity would spend money on, most notably partying. He exists on one meal a day, constantly on the road, doing 12 events a month, and surviving, by his own words, on really nothing more than a lot of pot. In 1980, after living this lifestyle for a number of years now, Rollen says that he had begun to feel empty. He questions whether this is all there is to life. And in his own words, he said that the Hollywood high had become shallow. Back at his hotel room after a Super Bowl game, he switches on the television, and a program titled Today in Bible Prophecy is playing. Whilst watching this, an epiphany hits him. He realizes that this is what he had been looking for, a purpose that his life had been lacking, and something that he felt he wanted to commit every waking second of his life to for the rest of eternity. Thinking about how he manages to inject himself into live television for millions to see, he believes that he can use his television exposure to spread the gospel. The Rainbow Man's outfit changes, and although he still wears the wig, he now has t-shirts with Christian messaging on them, and he also creates a large sign which reads John 3:16, hoping that people would be interested in what John 3:16 is. His idea that maybe some would seek out answers and find this verse, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." That year, he sells what little he has left, except for some clothes in his car, and he states that he doesn't want to prostitute himself for products anymore. Having sold everything, he takes what money he has and lives in the back of his car, sleeping in rest stops and traveling from state to state, even international at times. He spreads his message at derbies, the Olympics, Miss America pageants, even the royal wedding. Over the next 8 years, he drives around 60,000 miles per year and spreads the word of God as best he can. He believes that time is running out and World War III is imminent. A nuclear holocaust was on the horizon, and anyone who didn't find God was going to suffer endlessly. Through this period in his life, it wasn't always easy sailing. The directors of sporting television events had begun to find him to be quite a nuisance. They would say that he's getting $10,000 per second of airtime to spread a message that they didn't approve of, or should I say profit off. They also felt as though his fanatical presence would ruin dramatic moments of games, steering the viewer's attention away from the action and toward his antics. They would often curse at him from their producer trucks. Arena security would block him from entering, and Rollen recalls one time where a director picked him up in a golf cart and drove him around. It was here that he was told that the director had friends in the business who would break his legs if he ever held that sign up again during one of these televised events. In the mid-1980s, Rollen would meet a woman by the name of Margaret Hockridge, a schoolteacher who lived in Virginia. The two fall in love, and she joins him on his mission to spread the word. Living in the back of the car with Rollen, the two would travel to sporting events together, and all seemed well until about 1986. According to Margaret, she did not stand in the right spot to hold up her sign during one game, and later that evening, Rollen strangled her violently. She leaves and divorces him shortly after. Rollen does deny these claims, but has this to say about the situation. "No one can meet my standards, but I don't recall ever hitting her." Near the end of the 80s, things started to get dire for Rollen. He was running low on funds, and had been getting to games mostly on donations from Christian evangelist groups. He's convinced that World War III will begin at any moment, and Christ will return any day. All of this would see an increase in his intensity and desperation towards trying to convert as many people as possible. The television crews had become savvy to his antics, and it was becoming more and more difficult for him to get airtime. And in a stroke of bad luck, a drunk driver crashes and completely wrecks his car. Rollen finds himself broke and homeless, living in Skid Row of LA. Despite the circumstances he had found himself in, his commitment to the mission wouldn't die, and he comes up with a new plan. He would create another character, one that was evil and wanted to target Christian buildings and important figures. And in doing this, he wanted to bring more and more attention to the general public that the rapture was coming. The idea was that his negative actions would garner interest into what this faith is, and who are these people that are being targeted. He'd hoped for press interviews with the preachers on his list, and overall, a positive message would flourish. Rollen sets off a string of smoke and stink bombs in various locations: a church, a Christian bookstore, a newspaper office, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and in these locations he would leave letters. One of the letters seemed to be a hit list of sorts, and it had the names of preachers on it. Each letter was signed, the Antichrist. This did generate a lot of fear, especially for the people inside the buildings, as they thought the location they were in was on fire, and that their lives were in serious danger. Even after the threat of the smoke bomb subsided, some of these people did live in fear, wondering if they were ever going to get attacked. Rollen states that although he recognizes this was a sick way to go about things, he didn't see that much of a difference in it than waving a sign at a sports game. He says no one got hurt, and the end result was going to be positive in his mind. Furthermore, his presence at sporting events had become more of a nuisance than ever before. He sets off remote-controlled air horns at critical times, for example, when golfers are going to swing, and soon an arrest warrant for him is released. He is placed on the FBI wanted list, and they say that he may have a firearm. He's considered unhinged and dangerous. Rollen goes into hiding again and spends most of his time in Skid Row hotels. Here he spends up to 18 hours a day watching television. He would wake up in the morning and watch Christian speakers, then the Christian club at noon. He'd tune into the news as the day went on and would obsess over shootings, bombings, disasters and tragedies. As the night came upon him, he'd watch crime-related shows, Dateline, 60 Minutes, Tonight, and then he would finish his day by watching more preachers. Obsessed that the rapture is imminent, he says that Jesus had told him to alert the world of impending doom, and that his actions, whatever they may be, are justified under the Fifth Amendment, that in time of war, a crime to prevent greater harm is acceptable. Rollen soon begins to prepare what he calls to be a final presentation. September of 1992. Posing as a contractor, he picks up 2 day laborers, whom he convinces he has work for them, and he drives them to a hotel near LA airport. He takes them up to room 718, and plans to hold them hostage until he is granted a free 3-hour-long live press conference that would be broadcast across America. When they all get to the room, there's a maid who is cleaning, and confusion arises. Rollen pulls out a gun. The day laborers flee and manage to get out of the room quickly, and the maid retreats to the bathroom, locking herself in. There is a phone in there, and she calls 911. Rollen barricades himself in the room by nailing boards across the entrance door and places signs with Bible references all over the window. As police gather around the building, negotiations begin, and through this time, Rollen would sometimes throw stink bombs from the window at them. The officers say that the stink bombs were no concern, but what they were worried about is that he had threatened to shoot at planes that were landing nearby. The negotiations are tense, and Rollen will not let up, demanding they deliver him this press conference. Here is an excerpt from one of these interactions. Negotiator: We've been on the phone now for quite some time, Rollen. You've been up there for 6 hours. I've never seen a 3-hour press conference before. It's not going to happen. Rollen: I want the press conference, and I want it national, not local. Negotiator: We can't make you any guarantees that you can talk to the press as long as you stay up there. If you come out, then we can talk. Rollen: I've watched cop shows before. I know you cops try to get a handle on what's going on. You're just saying that. Negotiator. I think you watch too much TV, Rollen. Rollen. It's a good teaching tool. Reality television is a good teacher. Current affairs. Real life. Reality. Negotiator. If that's the case, then you gotta know that nobody ever wins in a situation like this. This goes on for 9 hours, and as Rollen is watching the news covering his hostage situation, he realizes that his final presentation is not going anywhere near to what he had hoped. No one is saying anything about the rapture, or his religious message. They're all just talking about a man holding a maid hostage in a hotel room. He says that he feels like he failed. He weeps and sits down to smoke a joint. Police seize this opportunity and throw a concussion grenade through the window. Rollen is stunned and the door is kicked down. Police place him under arrest. Following his capture, Rollen is hit with 11 separate charges, including 3 counts of kidnapping and hostage-taking, and it is said that the book was thrown at him. The DA would argue that he is a very sick and dangerous man. He rejects a plea deal that would have seen him in prison for 12 years, and opts to go to open court instead, where he knew cameras would be filming. He refused counsel and represented himself, and at the end of the trial, he's found guilty on 8 felonies. Here he again tries to spread the message, and after he is found guilty, he launches into an aggressive rant, yelling, "Forgive them, Lord. They know not what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing, Lord." He screams and shouts about the nuclear holocaust which is imminent, and it takes a team of people to be able to remove him from the room. Sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. On August 3rd, 1993, Rollen is shuttled to Mule Creek State Prison, which is where he is at the very time of recording this video. A prison interview with Rollen would see him have these words to say: "Jesus will come before I get out. My final presentation was mistimed. The end of the world was nigh. It was a crime to prevent greater harm. It was my duty to warn the world of the coming apocalypse. If somebody is standing in the way of me going into a burning building, I'm going to knock them on their butt. I was asked by psychiatrists here if I hear voices, and I answered no, I'm not hearing voices, but I've been hearing the voice of God for years. They'll never let me out on parole. They say I'm a threat to society. I wanted the trial for publicity, but I misjudged what sort of effect that would have had. Now that I look back on my decisions, I should have taken the plea deal. I should have taken it. I am somewhat sorry for what I did, but no one got hurt. No one was injured. I'm sorry that I prematurely did it at the wrong time in history. My story is a sad one, but also a glorious one of the most magnificent in the world. If a person has Jesus Christ with them, they can be successful, even in prison. Since being locked up, Rollen has been denied parole 8 times. Each denial is because that there is a fear he could still be a threat should he ever be released. He is calm and follows rules, but according to prison staff, he has never shown remorse for what he did, never acknowledged that his actions were misguided, and he gives them the impression that he would do it again, or more if he felt he had to. It's at this point of the video that I'm no longer speaking from research, and now sharing my own thoughts and opinions on this case. And quite an interesting little case it was, hey. I know it doesn't hold the usual pain and suffering that comes from the videos I tend to work on, but in its own right, I think there's a lot going on here. I'm in 2 minds about Rollen. On one hand, I think the 3 consecutive life sentences is absolute overkill, like killing a mosquito with a shotgun. I think the man probably needs a lot of help, therapy, counseling, and he's not really someone who deserves that hard prison life. By all means, it didn't really seem like he wanted to hurt anyone, or that he has urges to harm. But on the other hand, it does seem as though he would be willing to do anything to accomplish whatever his goal is, especially if he is convinced that his actions might save the world. From researching his life, it appears that for most of it, he's been looking for purpose to fill the void within him. Starting out with trying to impress others using beer and fast cars, then breaking Guinness World Records, and then what he thought to be an easy path to celebrity status. Obviously, this is no diagnosis, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn if he has some form of problem related to a grandiose sense of self. This is most notably observed when he said that no one can meet his standards in terms of a romantic partner, And the fact that he admitted he doesn't even like sports. He was just using that form of entertainment because it was a way to accomplish his goals, and it made him feel special in the process. I do wonder if there's any correlation there to how his mind operates, and the extreme measures he thought he needed to take to convert others to his faith. I would like to say that I don't intend for this video by any means to come across as some sort of anti-religion message. I have some very close friends who are dedicated Christians, and I've had conversations with them long into the night about what their faith means to them and the ins and outs of what they believe. But what has always been present in these conversations is that with my friends, not once have they ever, or did I get the sense that they were trying to convert me over to their way of life. It's more they were presenting to me what they believe in, and I could do with that information as I please. So just like there are extreme people who will try to convince us to join their line of thought when it comes to fashion, sports, politics and more, so too are there the religious folk. I imagine to these people, they may believe that the end of the world is coming, and whether it is or isn't, is irrelevant. To them, it's a reality. When I ponder this thought, I have to stop and think, if I existed in that reality, how would I act? If I thought a group of people were about to be hit by a bus, would I stand by and watch it happen, or would I try to convince them to move? It's a confronting thought indeed when I dig into it. I do know the example is messy, and of course not the same, but it can be applied in some fashion, especially when I think of Rollen in this light. It leads me to the question, was he really a loving and caring person, attempting to save people from hell on earth? Or was he an insecure and purposeless individual, one who found validation and self-worth from the idea that he had found something bigger than what most others seemed to understand? Despite the negative connotations of that question that I just posed, I do think he's a decent person, one who may have issues with ego, self-image, and one who does crave attention, a need to be wanted, and for his life to be validated externally. But within that, I don't think malice was ever a goal on his part. Because of that, when I think of him simmering away in a prison cell, I do feel sadness. I feel that he's misguided, had lost his way, and instead of finding salvation or help, his path has led him to more torment. I'm not sure what will happen to him, if his parole will ever be granted, or if he'll die behind bars. But I do think there can be a lot to mull over and learn from this situation. Even down to things such as the influence television, media, and digital entertainment can have over one's life. How people can form these inner relationships with what they perceive to be a two-way interaction. How nowadays, algorithms latch onto whatever it is we seem to be interested in, and they continue to feed us what we already know, thus furthering an echo chamber, rather than allowing us to organically discover and learn through the old-fashioned way of meeting new people, having conversations, and experiencing without a screen. Even then though, there was always problems with the world before all of the screens came about. I guess that's just how things are, hey? The world moves and problems can always be poked at almost every situation. Or who knows? Maybe I'm old-fashioned. Maybe how things are now is simply the natural flow of life. The screens more and more become normality whilst the world grows, changes and evolves, thus requiring information to be attained in new ways. Rollen was at the forefront of the television age, likely one of the first to form a parasocial relationship with a screen. When I think of him back then, studying celebrities and their careers through talk shows and televised interviews, I can't help to think how people in our age do the same thing. We follow celebrities on Instagram, Twitter, and we eat up all of their words and thoughts, and it makes us feel connected to these individuals that have no idea that we exist. I suppose, if I really think about it though, being fearful of the digital age is no way to exist. It's upon us and it's not going away, and within it there can be a lot of good, sharing ideas, learning new things easily. So maybe feeding current interests through algorithms and apps is not so bad, but one would be hard-pressed to argue me out of the idea that spending 18 plus hours a day ingesting this stuff, like Rollen did, can have any long-term benefits. Anyway, before I wrap up, I can't help but to feel that by making this video, I am in some way furthering Rollen's message, even if it's not my intention. Maybe Rollen made more of an impact than he possibly thought he did. The Rainbow Man's legacy has lived on in many forms since his incarceration, athletes adopting John 3:16 strips under their eyes. In-N-Out Burger franchise printed it on the bottom of their cups for a time, and many others now travel to games to raise the John 3:16 sign. So who knows? Possibly the YouTube channel Dave's Lemonade is yet another rung in the ladder of Rock and Rollin', the Rainbow Man's legacy.